Hi everyone, and welcome to The Take. Thanks for tuning in for today's episode. We've got a bit to cover, lots of questions that have come through in the chat, so I will talk you through that. So it's been an interesting week. Obviously, there's a lot of things happening globally, and unfortunately, what does happen globally in terms of geopolitics, etc., does have ramifications for the economy. So we have definitely sort of seen, obviously, things like oil prices going up, etc. So the reality is that there is always things going on. It does take a little while for organisations, businesses, everyone to just kind of basically settle into a rhythm. Hopefully things will settle down sooner rather than later, but it still feels pretty busy down on the ground in Melbourne town. So I just wanted to kind of walk through where things are at from a market perspective. So we've obviously clocked into March, sort of middle of March. This is typically when we see the time of year when organisations are really starting to settle down, particularly into the rhythm. Everyone's back on board, everyone's settling down for whatever those projects might look like, and things are starting to really take shape and take hold. There's still some key themes that are standing out at the moment. AI is the question that just keeps getting raised again and again and again, so we'll delve into that a little bit if that makes sense. Skills shortages definitely still happening across HR. I literally can think of probably an absolute huge amount of roles that have come through to the firm this year just around analytics and systems and REM capability. There is a whole lot of benchmarking, systems upgrades, data cleansing, etc. going on. So there's obviously a lot happening in that space. I think nearly every organisation I'm talking to at the moment is doing some sort of software upgrade or systems upgrade in relation to their data. So lots happening in that particular space. Obviously there is a lot of still regulatory demand, I suppose, if that makes sense, in terms of changing legislation, pay governance laws, transparency, etc. So there's a lot going on, which brings me to a point. I was having a chat to a CPO about this the other day. We were kind of like, what's going on with HR? It feels like, there's scope creep, if that makes sense, in terms of HR's being expected to do more and more and more. And it's a really interesting point. And I think at the moment, there's probably there's a lot going on, obviously, in the world at the moment, in society, etc. And I think what's happening is there's that kind of the delineation, well, not lack of delineation, I suppose you would say, where organisational leaders, at that C-suite, the executive, they're kind of asking HR to kind of help them solve problems like, AI disruption, what's happening from the economy, like workforce disruption in regards to a whole bunch of things, working from home and hybrid and all this kind of stuff. So, there's a lot there that HR can't have an answer for and can't be involved in. So I think there's a little bit where, I think there's a situation where HR probably does need to kind of push back a little bit to the exec, because I just think of what's happening around organisations, and of course it affects people, and that's a huge part of an organisation. But I do feel that there's been this expectation for a few years now, and it probably started with COVID, that HR's kind of going to come up with all the answers and then the solutions. And I talk to lots and lots of senior stakeholders, and they're kind of like, CEO is asking me about AI, and to be honest, everyone's pretty green on their AI journey at the moment, and I think that's really difficult for HR to answer that question. So I think don't be afraid if you are in that senior leadership role. I don't know, or I don't have the answers, because what's basically happening is, things are moving so rapidly and so fast that, nobody has all the answers. And I think what we are seeing is that, everyone's asking the question around AI, and there absolutely is a skills gap there for pretty much everyone. But the skills gap it's not technical so much, it's leadership. So it's around leadership teams figuring out how to work with probably a human and a, bot workforce, if that makes sense. So I think it's really a leadership issue at the moment, as opposed to the technical. Yes, the technical is there, but I think that's what we're seeing at the moment. And I think there's definitely that, there's a gap in the leadership capability, but also everyone's talking about AI, but a lot of organisations just don't have a clear workforce strategy for it. So I think that's what probably really needs to happen, because everyone I talk to, everyone's yabbering about it. What's it going to do? How's it going to impact, etc. But nobody is really kind of doing that well at the moment. So if you are an organisation that's getting asked that, or a leader that's getting asked those questions, I think it's actually really work out the strategy, and that probably lends me to my next point around upskilling, capability lift. It's great to see that. It feels like organisations are putting learning back on the agenda. There was a really big gap there for a long time, probably in the last couple of years, where organisations were just so focused on the bottom line, so focused on cost minimisation, making sure that they were running as efficiently as possible. But really, I think the way to move forward for organisations is really to do that wholesale, skills analysis. What are the skills that you've got? What are the gaps? And do we put everyone through micro-learning? What does that look like? So great to see that organisations are bringing that back to the table. Not everyone, but some of those organisations that are, I think, really cognizant that that's how you're going to get your organisation to shift into the next, I suppose, severe of whatever that looks like in terms of AI. They're actually really focusing around that. So, and again, it doesn't need to be anything that's like overly sophisticated. Sometimes it's just the micro-learning. That's just the micro-learning pieces that are really important. So good to see some investment happening at that level. If you do have questions, please just pop them in the chat. I can see that some people have already pre-registered, so I will definitely jump on there shortly and have a look around the questions. So, look, we've obviously had International Women's Day. We've had gender pay gap reporting coming through. Pay transparency laws are, I think, in place at the moment. So that's a really interesting situation, because I think that is giving people, employees rather, and boards and general society, I guess, the information and the data to be asking those questions around why people are getting paid, what they're getting paid, and really kind of wanting to understand why there is a difference as well. So there's definitely a lot of work to go in that space, I dare say, around that. So that's just something that's super topical at the moment as well. Everyone that's probably had to do their WGEA reporting knows all about that. So I would say that's going to stay very high on the agenda for boards and directors, because there is absolutely that, shall we say, blowtorch focus on that at the moment coming from the government. So if you're not up to speed with what's happening there, definitely get on board, because there's a lot happening there. So I think in terms of what's happening across the market, and just to kind of talk through where the demand is at the moment in HR, and kind of going nationally, kind of broadening out here in terms of what's happening. So at this stage, we are definitely still seeing really strong demand for solid BPs, employee relations, industrial relations. That is not slowing down realistically, unless we get change at the federal level. From a federal perspective, we are not going to see any change in regards to that, because they do have quite a large agenda from an IR perspective. So we're talking everything from respect at work, we're talking psychosocial safety laws, so all of that stuff that's been rolled out. Some organisations have not even kind of got to that point. So, if you haven't, I suggest you do so quickly, because there is obviously there's liability that aligns with that. And I think that's a bit of a thing that we're seeing at the moment, and that's that's a hard thing for HR. There is so much risk and compliance, and everyone is drowning in that risk and compliance, because the reality is it's important, and it's the stuff that's noisy, it's the stuff that boards care about, directors care about, because of the liability piece. Not particularly what HR wants to spend their time doing, but it is important. And unfortunately, our industrial relations framework is messy and complex. And to my earlier point, this is why we're seeing so much demand in the people analytics space, in the reporting, the systems, etc. These days, thankfully, most HRISs are reasonably priced. You don't have to go to the top end. You can literally get something that can be suited to an organisation of 10 people, etc. So really, there's probably no excuses for the reporting side of things. And if anything, when HR is trying to get that business case across to the owners or the directors, etc., just giving them a business case in relation to things like, wage underpayment laws, that usually gets it across the line. If you can give them an example of, organisations such as Woolworths and Coles getting fined, it's a lot of money, and the best solution is usually prevention. So just popping that out there, just to give a bit of insight there. Remuneration roles, again, not many of these around, so super huge demand at the moment in regards to that. I would say sector-wise, what we're seeing, healthcare 100%. Infrastructure still ticking along quite nicely. When we think about infrastructure, it's not just roads, tunnels, bridges, etc., which we have a lot in Victoria. I think there's still a lot happening in New South Wales, also in Queensland. We're talking data centres. That's the hot new thing at the moment. So it's data centres that are getting built. It's also things like wind farms, solar farms, etc. So infrastructure has a long shelf life. Things take a long time, and then that employs obviously a lot of people as well. So healthcare, again, huge capital intensive economy, workforce rather. So that's really kind of going out. Government's an interesting one. There's still pockets definitely growing within the government, shrinking in some, growing in other areas. Energy, another one doing quite well at the moment. Transport, logistics, anything medical related, services. The sector that's probably going through the most, I guess, wobble at the moment is probably technology. And if you work in that sector, it's probably going to come as no surprise to you. Obviously, it feels like the writing's on the wall for this from anyone that's actually been paying attention. AI is going to probably wipe out a lot of the SaaS sector, and that's where a lot of organisations, the Atlassians and Xeros of the world, have obviously made big money. Tech is just one of those sectors that evolves so fast, so it's not overly surprising that sort of stuff is happening. Obviously, when they cut in big numbers. So, feeling for anyone that's been affected by that. But the reality is, tech is a very volatile sector. If I had my choice, I'd be choosing a more sustainable sector. And just on sectors, someone asked me the other day. They're like, actually, people have asked me this throughout my career. Actually, I really want to be a specialist in, I don't know, mining or whatever it might be, or infrastructure. And I've always been on the side of caution of going, don't be an industry specialist. The reason being is that the industry's changed. 25 years ago, automotive, banking, investment banking, FMCG, manufacturing, they were all the big employers, big global multinationals. People probably thought those sectors would never die. We don't have automotive anymore. We don't have investment banking. Banking's not hiring. So I'd be really wary of wedding yourself to a sector, because you might not think they will, but the sectors do die. They become redundant. New sectors are created, and you never want to be tied to a specific sector, because if that sector is not hiring, the challenges then become that you are a one-trick pony. You really want to be someone that can play in a whole range of different sectors, and that probably goes to your skill set as well. We're moving into probably an economy, a workforce where your skills are going to have to be basically really broad, if that makes sense. So we might jump on to questions, and I can see a few coming up here. So I'm going to just jump in and see what's happening. Just bear with me. We're in our brand new office, which you can see now. We're up on level 8 and we've got fabulous views. It's a beautiful day here in Melbourne. If you're watching from interstate, I know there's a few of you. Okay, good question about tenure. Wow, yes, gone are the days of people working for a company for 10 or 15 years to get the gold watch. So that's something that shifts and changes. And I'd probably say this, when organisations are coming to hire from us, you can always tell where someone is from a generation, because they'll have expectations around tenure. So, for example, if it's someone quite senior, they'll expect people to have been in roles for like 5, 10 years, etc. The reality is the tenure these days, I would say, on average, it's probably, look, it does depend on the cohort, so the age, the demographic, if that makes sense. But I'd say, look, anyone under 40, probably 2 to 4 years is probably average. When you think about it, organisations, they get sold, delisted, merged faster than ever, which means employees get impacted. If you've been working in tech for the past 10 years, you've probably been made redundant 2 or 3 times. That's not unusual. So, that shifting kind of, I suppose, mindset, absolutely. I get it. Organisations want people to hang around, they're investing in them and all those sorts of things, but it's also unrealistic to think that people are going to, be there for their long service leave. 7 years is I think it's 15 years. It's a really long time these days. Things move very fast and quick. So just be mindful of that. And I think, and I would say also don't judge people on that, from that side of things. Okay, what HR competencies are you seeing evolve as a result of AI, and what continues being Consistently important. Yeah, really good question. So I think there's two parts to it. So there's the technical side of things, and I don't think that that's HR's responsibility. I think that's the business needs to figure out what and how they're using AI. I think probably the consistent thing is, it's the change management. It's the people side of things. Things are shifting, things are changing. Humans don't like change. At the end of the day, it's being able to help organisations and navigate that change. There's going to be changes to structures. There's going to be changes to roles. There's going to be changes to systems. So I think that the consistent, theme of that is actually helping to manage that change and helping leaders to have those conversations, difficult conversations, which is really stock standard of HR. If you don't like having difficult conversations, now is probably the time to get out of HR, because that is actually mostly your job. So being able to have those complex conversations and being able to deal with the grey, that is pretty much what HR has to do on a daily basis. Okay, that's a good one. In your experience, are employers actually across their obligations under Victoria's psychosocial legislation, or is there still a big awareness gap? Yeah, I'd say there's probably still a big awareness gap. It's fine to roll out legislation. It has to be implemented. So it has to be implemented at an organisational level. I would say probably there are certain sectors or there are certain organisations, I would say, that are probably doing it really well, and they probably have a good HR function that's well resourced and actually have these conversations, can get their leaders to cascade and roll this out. I would say there would be some organisations that would not have even started. So I think it's a really mixed bag. I think it's a little bit untested because I don't think anything's gone before the court at the moment. So, but it's definitely something that is, it's coming up, absolutely. Here we go. I'm sorry, I'm just jumping around to make sure I capture people's questions. Okay, I've got one here. Centres of Excellence. Always a topical question. So last year we saw specialist roles being absorbed into HRBPs. There seems to be more CV roles on the market of late. What's your take on how this will evolve in the next 6 to 12 months? Yeah, good question. I wish I knew the answers. You're spot on. Things, poor HR has had to do more with less over recent years. I think there's certain centres of excellence roles that will always be in demand. That's systems, that's RAM, and that's employee relations, 100%. And talent acquisition, it's really fun. Most HR people don't like recruitment, generally speaking. There's a few of you that like it, but generally speaking, they like TA to be separated out. So I think that'll probably always stay that way. I really think it comes down to where organisations are at in their journey. Do I think we're ever going to go back to an environment where there's really, fat centres of excellence? Probably not. I just don't think it's that economic cycle that we're in at the moment. So I think lean is still the order of the day. L&OD and talent acquisition, they're always probably the fair weather friends. And what I mean by that is they're sometimes seen as a nice to have. If the organisation's doing really well, they're making lots of money, they're really happy to invest in, learning, OD, wellbeing, all that kind of stuff, talent acquisition, put in great systems and things like that. When they're not hiring, sometimes organisations will have that mindset of, oh, well, I don't need a TA team, I'm not hiring. So, I'm being flippant, of course, but we tend to find that's how things sort of tend to play out. So, but great to see that there is absolutely growth across the board. PA is coming back online, L&OD is coming back online, which is really great. So it always tends to pick up from the bottom first, if that makes sense. So there's not, hundreds of 200 to 300k OD roles floating around. There never really is, but the demand is coming back, which is fantastic to see. Okay, sorry, again, just jumping around. I think we've got 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to walk through a few questions. Excuse me, here we go. What's being talked about in boardrooms but not on the shop floor? Interesting question. So, and I guess a way of looking at it's like what are people saying behind closed doors that they're not talking to their employees about? Look, I think it's really interesting. It's always it's a balance, right? Organisations, particularly if they're a corporate, they're a business, they need to make money, right? They need to be profitable to employ employees. when you get things like the Victorian government coming out and saying that employees are going to have the right to work 2 days from home, playing in technically the business field, that is going to create issues. And I think, you'd be an idiot to not think that AI is going to impact jobs. It will, and it will impact certain sectors. I guess what we want to try and find the balance is that, someone said to me the other day, and I was like, yeah, fair. They said, look, the more my employees work from home, the more I'm reminded that I can offshore their roles. And, sure, that's a bit brutal, but I kind of was like, yeah, okay, fair. Do you know what I mean? So, and the roles that are at risk of being made redundant or offshored are the knowledge workers. So people like you and I who sit in front of a computer, it's really the industrial revolution 2.0. It's not the tradespeople. It's not those people that have, capital intensive jobs that are at risk. So, it's a balance right now in terms of, giving employees what they need and giving employees and having that fair. But if the pendulum starts swinging too far, and probably I think what a lot of organisations are probably talking about is that, over the past few years, I think, the pendulum's probably been firmly in the employee area, if that makes sense, and employees have, had a bit of that power, etc. We only need to go back to, COVID, where there wasn't enough people to do things. That's now starting to go, okay, well, that's great. We're happy to have all these things, but we also need to see the output. And, not being a total economic nerd, but productivity is really bad across the economy, across all developed Western world at the moment. If you can't get that productivity shifting and moving, then more people are going to lose jobs. That's unfortunately just what's going to happen. That's just the way things go in terms of the data sets and in terms of, businesses need to make money. We've all kind of been through the last few years where things have been really tight and a lot of people have been made redundant. And unfortunately, it's the people that are earning big salaries that generally get, made redundant. That's the hard part. Do you know what I mean? So that's where I think we've just got to find this balance of, organisations feeling that they are getting value and output from their employees, as well as the employees feeling that they're valued as well. So I think there's just probably a little bit of a kind of it's a little bit out of whack at the moment, I would dare say, from that side of things. That's just kind of what I'm hearing and seeing. Okay, what are the hardest HR skill sets to find? Oh, God. Look, it depends on what you're looking for, if that makes sense. So, for example, I would definitely say employee relations is probably the hardest at the moment. That's what ER and IR is driving. It's probably the one of the rarest skill sets at the moment, and I'm talking about the purists. So I'm talking about people that are just doing IR day in, day out. That's definitely driving up the price, particularly if you want like a lawyer. The law firms having a field day at the moment. Good on them. Well done there. In terms of, 2 questions. Here we go. How are you finding Vic compared with the other states? Good question. So, good old Victoria. Look, I think, we've got an election this year. Depending which way that will go, that will have an impact in terms of some of the policies. I think, not going to lie, we're in a lot of debt, so we need to make that up. So I know that there is a lot of investment coming online from things such as data centres. I know the government, or the Victorian government rather, is going out hard in terms of trying to secure that investment, and along with solar farms, wind farms, energy, all that kind of stuff. That's it's a bit of a bad thing, if that kind of makes sense, because obviously those people have to live somewhere and that creates a housing problem. Anyway, it's all tied up. I think Vic is going okay. It's, I would believe everything that you see in the media, if that makes sense. I would say the growth is definitely constrained to a certain part of the market. And what I mean by that is really size of organisations. So that growth is really coming in that small medium enterprise. So we're talking probably 500 to 5,000. That's generally where we're sort of seeing that growth, and probably I want to narrow that down to 1,000 to 3,000 is probably where the growth is coming from at the moment. So I would say it's less of those large ends of town that are hiring, and we're seeing that consistently across the board. That's, again, the bigger you are. If you've got 50,000 staff, then you can shave 10% of your employee base off with AI, then you're going to do that. The economies of scale are going to be huge, right? So we just know that that's how it's playing out at the moment. So I've got a follow up to that question. So what are you seeing in your the more senior level. Yeah. So look, OD, it's a really valuable skill set, and it's a really, when it's used correctly and when organisations invest in it, then it really has value. The hard part about OD is its value often is it takes time. You don't suddenly see the impact of a really great OD strategy overnight, right? You don't see it quarter to quarter. You see it over years. Now, a lot of organisations, they haven't got the patience all the time because, their shareholders or the market, whatever, is demanding the share price rise quarter to quarter, right? So the challenge in that situation is that when you do have long-term initiatives that you often see in that learning or that organisational development area, it's the timing of the outcomes. So that is a real challenge that we're seeing at the moment. We are definitely seeing more demand. Are we seeing, lots of roles come above 200? Probably not. I would say that's tied to the fact if you look at the size of the organisations that are hiring, gone are the days where an ANZ or a NAB or whoever Australia Post is going to hire, 80 senior OD professionals between 250 to 350. That's just not going to happen, because if you think about the average size of an organisation that's hiring at the moment, so if you're sitting at maybe 500 or 1,000 employees, your CPO might only be earning 350. So, the head of OD might be on 200. Do you know what I mean? You've got to look at that scalability in terms of relativity to where roles are coming in and what sectors they're sitting in at the moment. So, some of those sectors that have employed a lot of those OD people in the past, banking, finance, tech, insurance, they're not really the sectors that are hiring at the moment. So the work in OD at the moment is a lot in those messy spaces. So, healthcare, infrastructure, energy, all of those ones that are complex. So, and when I say complex, you're not just dealing with sort of those knowledge workers, you're dealing with a lot of blue collar, etc. Some complexity there as well. So hopefully that answers. I think we've got a couple of minutes left if anyone still has questions. That's an interesting one. Has hybrid work gone too far? Interesting question. Look, not going to lie, there are definitely organisations that are moving to 4 days. Again, I've said before, I don't think we're ever going to work to 5 days a week, but we definitely, it's really hard because at the end of the day, it's completely, we see it across the board. We recruit for organisations that have got 5 days in the office, we've got organisations that are completely remote. The line in the sand is generally 3 days in the office, so 3 days in the office, 2 from home, but it does depend. It depends on who your CEO is, how he or she feels about being in office, and it probably depends on the demographic. I think it's really easy to revert to that command and control type of leadership of seeing everyone in the office. Of course, we know just seeing people doesn't mean they're being productive, but there are definitely cohorts of that, leadership group that will certainly be, I want to see people in the office. So, not going to lie, it's going through a bit of a shift, and again, like I said, never going to go to 5 days, but the reality is it depends on the CEO. Her view, his view, HR stuck in the middle, to be honest, that's generally what happens. HR stuck in the middle trying to keep everyone happy. So don't be mean to HR, it's not their fault, I would say. So look, we're almost wrapping up. Just a reminder that the next episode will be on Friday, the 10th of April. So I hope everyone can enjoy. Do pop your questions if you've got feedback, if I'm giving you too much detail, not enough detail. Let me know. This is really just an opportunity for me to kind of get a market update across to people and answer some specific questions just around stuff that's topical that we hear day in, day out across the team. So please just make sure you do that. If you're looking for any role or you're looking to hire, please reach out to myself or the team. We've got lots of opportunities at the moment. The market seems to be moving in the right space, which is fantastic. Hopefully that will continue. So I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. Enjoys the beautiful weather that we're having in Melbourne at the moment. I hope everyone is getting some decent weather, and hopefully we'll see you all tune into the next episode of The Take on the 10th of April. Thanks everyone.